All right, let's dive into something truly fascinating today. We're going to unpack a really profound psychological theory that gets to the heart of a question many of us have wondered about. Why do people sometimes act as their own worst enemy? It's a theory that reveals the hidden and often fractured world created by trauma.
I mean, really think about that for a second. Why would someone who desperately wants love keep pushing people away? Or someone on the brink of success just completely derail their own career? It makes no sense on the surface, right? Well, it turns out there's a powerful and deeply human explanation for all this self-defeating behavior. And this real-life story is the perfect jumping-off point. Here you have a responsible, professional social worker who suddenly acts completely out of character. She said it herself. She couldn't understand what had replaced her. It's almost like another person literally took the wheel. And according to a Finnish psychiatrist named Jorma Tähkä, that's almost exactly what happens. So here's the core idea of his theory. It suggests that severe childhood trauma doesn't just leave a bad memory or a scar, it can actually fracture our sense of self into separate, competing parts.
Tähkä's work argues that instead of having one single integrated personality, a person can end up with multiple selves living inside them. And the crazy part is, these selves are often at war with each other, pulling the person in totally different directions, often without them even realizing what's happening.
So let's meet the key players in this internal drama. First, you've got what Tähkä calls the developing self. This is the healthy part of us, the one that's responsible and wants to grow and live a good life. But then, trauma creates these two other states. There's the victim self, which is forever stuck in the past, feeling wronged and deprived. And then there's the subjugating self, which, well, it copes by becoming a version of the very person who caused the trauma in the first place. Okay, so let's dig into that first one, the victim self, or uhrimina in Finnish. You can think of this part as the inner child who never got what it needed and is now stuck, perpetually feeling shortchanged by life.
You have to understand, this victim self is running on the fuel of deep, unmet childhood needs. It looks at normal adult responsibilities and sees them as a totally unfair burden. It's always blaming the world for its problems and feels this bitter, almost destructive envy towards anyone who seems happy or capable. And it's an absolute master at using guilt and pity to get what it wants. But here's the kicker. No amount of help is ever enough to fill that void.
And this is where Tähkä's metaphor is just brilliant and honestly a little terrifying. He compares the victim self to a cuckoo chick in a nest. You know, when you give in to its demands, when you feed it with pity or let it dodge responsibility, it doesn't get better. It just gets stronger and bigger until it eventually pushes the healthy, capable part of you right out of the nest.
So this is the really crucial part to get. The victim self is basically an enemy to your own growth. If your developing self starts to do well, gets a promotion, finds a healthy relationship, the victim self will find a way to burn it all down. Why? Why would a part of you do that? Because success means moving on, and this part of the personality is terrified of letting go of the past. It needs to remain a victim to feel safe.
But the victim self isn't the only ghost in the machine. There's another key player, the subjugating self, or alastava mina. And as you're about to see, it's basically the other side of the very same coin.
This is a really wild and kind of dark psychological twist. As a defense mechanism to escape the terrifying feeling of being helpless, a part of the personality does something shocking. It adopts the traits of the abuser. It's like the old saying, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. It identifies with the aggressor as a desperate way to feel powerful instead of small. Now check this out. It's fascinating how they're perfect mirror images. The victim self feels worthless and inferior. The subjugating self projects this false, destructive superiority. The victim self feels helpless. The subjugating self copes by making others feel helpless. And the mind-bending part is, the very same person can flip from one state to the other in a heartbeat. And this gives us a really powerful way to understand a tragic cycle we've all seen before. The person who was once bullied grows up to become the bully. Why? Because it's a desperate attempt to take all that internalized shame and worthlessness and just project it onto somebody else, just for a moment of relief. Okay, so we've seen the what. We see this fracture in the personality. But now let's get to the why. What kind of childhood environment actually forges this kind of deep, painful split? The sources point to a few really toxic environments. Of course, there's the obvious stuff, homes with violence, addiction, total chaos. But the damage can be much, much quieter, too. A home where a child's feelings are just consistently ignored. Or one where love is totally conditional. You only get it if you get good grades or win at sports. In these families, kids are often forced into roles. You're the scapegoat, or you're the little adult who has to take care of mom or dad's feelings. And if you boil it all down, this is the devastating message the child receives over and over again. It's this unspoken belief that you exist for my needs. The child isn't seen as a real, separate person. They're basically treated as an object, an instrument for the parent. Their true, authentic self is seen as an inconvenience, so it learns to go into hiding. And that's where the fracture begins. So this brings us to the really crucial part. What happens when these fractured individuals become parents themselves? Well, as you can probably guess, this internal chaos has a massive impact, and the cycle of trauma continues. And the pattern is just tragically predictable. The parent's needy victim self turns their own child into a little parent, a process called parentification. They also start competing with their own kid for attention, becoming jealous and resentful. And probably the most terrifying part, they can flip on a dime, switching from the needy, helpless victim into a cruel, punishing abuser without any warning at all. Can you just imagine the psychological whiplash from that? One minute, a little girl is her mom's best friend, forced to hear all these heavy adult problems. The very next, her mom flips into that subjugating self and starts screaming that the little girl is the source of all evil. For a child, that reality is completely shattering and impossible to make sense of. And here's what makes this cycle so incredibly hard to stop. These individuals can be masters of performance. For a 15-minute meeting with a teacher or a social worker, they can put on a very convincing mask of the perfect, loving parent. They know all the right things to say, they play the part beautifully, completely hiding the chaos that erupts the second they walk back through their own front door. So where does all of this leave us? Well, it leaves us with a pretty challenging final thought. Tähkä's theory gives us a kind of map to these hidden parts of ourselves, the ones forged in the fire of trauma. And recognizing these patterns, it isn't about blaming anyone. It's about understanding. So the real question is, how can this knowledge change the way we see puzzling behavior, not just in society or in others, but maybe, most importantly, in ourselves?